Hi everybody, welcome to another episode of Historia Politica Publica. In the episode of today, I will talk about the idea of the revolution, where this word came from, some examples of the revolution in the last 3 centuries, and also our contemporary society. We can talk about living in a revolution, especially in a kind of digital revolution with the use of social media, the internet, the interconnection, and so on. So, the idea of revolution, it was created in order to make a change into the system, although originally the term of the word, the concept of the revolution meant something different. The term was used for the first time in the 14th century, and it was to refer of the circular movement of planets and the sun. In that sense, the revolution must be historically contextualized, depending on the time which we are talking about revolution. However, some centuries later, political revolutions meant a significant change before 18th century, but not on a progressive way, rather into a cyclical movement. It is after the 18th century with the French Revolution when a collective action to change something to form a new beginning was called a revolution. So if before 18th century we could define revolution as a kind of rotation in which there were change of systems and so on, it is only after the 18th century when there is a moment of rupture. So let's say that the English Revolution would happen in the 1640s, 1650s after the Civil War. It was a moment in which with Oliver Cromwell as the leader, it was created the first republic in England. And yet, like 10 years later, the republic was abolished and a monarchy was again instituted. And then in 1688, even though the monarchy was undermined their powers through the Glorious Revolution, as the British people call it, it was still a kind of movement in which there was not a real rupture within the system. And yet it is after 1789, 1776, this is a debate that I will explore later, which was the most important revolution, the American Revolution of 1776, the independence of the colonies and the creation of the United States, or the Revolution of 1789 with the French Revolution, the origination of the First Republic 3 years later, the abolition of absolutism, the last remnants on feudalism, and so on. Because even though the French Revolution was closed many years later, and in 1815, the European leaders, the monarchs, joined again in order to create absolutism in Europe, the ideas of the revolution has permeated in the whole Europe, and it was not possible to go backwards again. So in that sense, even though at that time it was tried by the monarchies of Europe to establish a system of rotation to come back again to the system of the ancient regime, it was not possible because the ideas of the Jacobins has spread not just through France but also across Europe, through the empire of Napoleon and so on. In that sense, it can be argued that the French Revolution, it also had a great influence in further revolution, including the Haitian Revolution. At that time, the current Haiti was called Saint-Domingue, and it was the first place in the world in which slavery was abolished. It was after 1793 when Maximilien Robespierre proclaimed that the slaves had to be free, but obviously after his death, and when Girondins took the power, and later on the army of Napoleon, with the help of the English, tried to put again the oppressor system upon the island. But at the end, the island of Saint-Domingue got independence, and the slave revolt had been success, and it was created the state of Haiti. In that sense, French Revolution, Haitian Revolution, they had clear influence because as Saint-Domingue was a colony of France, obviously they were thinking, if you are trying to spread the rights of men and women towards the world, what about the black people like us? We need also freedom because we are humans like you. The Jacobins obviously were forced to concede because the argument led by Toussaint Louverture, the leader of the Black Rebellion, was completely right at that time. And for that reason, the black people, who many of them were part of the Jacobins, had to be granted freedom as the white people. In that sense, the important thing about the revolution of the 1789 was the overthrow of the monarchy, and this happened in the 19th century. In many countries of Europe, in France, the monarchy was restored in 1815. It was overthrown in 1830. However, there was just a change of king, and finally in 1848, the monarchy was definitely overthrown. So, in that sense, which is the first revolution? Let's say the English, 1650s, the French, or the American, or even earlier, because there are some moments like the incident of Bohemia or the French peasant revolt, that all of them were before the 14th century, and maybe they can be considered revolution. But the thing is that at that time, remember, the term didn't exist. It just came after the 14th century. And at the same time, those revolts didn't challenge the established order and were considered more a revolt. It is like the peasant revolt in England, which was carried in 1381. The leader was John Ball, was a priest who was trying to spread the message of Jesus Christ and henceforth wanted a more egalitarian society. He was killed on the 15th of July of 1381. And after that, the revolt was crushed. It was an idea to try to change the system, that one, but it failed. So for that reason, it is called the peasant revolt, and henceforth it is not considered a revolution. It was originated in Smithfields, which is a place in Holborn in central London, and from them on that got a lot of inspiration. It was bit later after the Black Death and so on, so they have this kind of connotations with the death of 1,000 of people in Europe, and how this shaped some ideas that John Ball was able to implement among his followers. But anyway, that will be for another episode. Also, the revolt, in theory, the difference between revolt and revolution is that the revolt is not planned. It is just a moment of self-defense that happens spontaneously, whereas a revolution, it is planned, is ordered, and challenge the status quo. We can think of the French Revolution, we can think of the Russian Revolution, and so on. But obviously, the term of revolution, it is quite controversial depending on the people who analyze that paradigm between the conservative and liberals. And there is a very interesting article about that, how in 1989, to commemorate the 200th anniversary of the French Revolution, there was a huge celebration in France. There were praise to the revolution, there were criticism, and years later an author, I don't remember the name of this person, but explained how everybody had different views about the revolution. So let's say the conservative, they believed that the revolution had created the modern world and henceforth destroyed the ideal life that was in the ancient regime, in which there was more order in society. The people from the left, depending on who you were asking, were saying like, well, the French Revolution was great until the Reign of Terror, so it was amazing in the first years because you had the parliamentary monarchy. Those 3 years were great. It was until the First Republic was established that everything went down, and they blamed the King Louis XVI because when he was in prison, he started to send letters to his friends, his monarchs, comrades, in order to attack the French people and so on. Also, you have the, let's say, more kind of communist-oriented left, in which they were saying that the revolution was not radical enough because at the end it was in the masses of the middle-class bourgeoisie, commanded by people like Maximilien Robespierre, Danton, Camille Desmoulins, Saint-Just, and so on. The feminists blamed the white male to not give that much importance to the women, because even though there were women who had a great role in the revolution, such as Théroigne de Méricourt, Olympe de Gouges, Madame de Staël, and many others, Mary Wollstonecraft, for instance, they were not given the role that they had for what they accomplished. They led the October March in Versailles in 1789 in order to take the king and Marie Antoinette and the queen in order to put them in Paris under the surveillance of the population. And even I think it's Olympe de Gouges who wrote the Declaration of Rights of Women after the Declaration of Rights of Men was published, and she mentioned how at that time, in theory, there was equality between men and women, but the women were not listened in the meetings. They were like despised in a kind of paternalistic way, so they felt quite unuseful for the revolution, in spite that they have been fundamental for carrying on the program. At the end of the statement, Olympe de Gouges says, and yet, in spite of this kind of machismo that we were facing from the white bourgeois people like Robespierre and the others, they were by far the best men of that time. So that can help to understand how this patriarchal idea in which the woman had always pushed to be inferior than men has been so permanent in every society, and even in that one that was very radical, those men who were by far the more egalitarian, and yet still they failed to treat the women as human beings. So in that sense, speaking about the French Revolution, it is an interpretation as a product of the Enlightenment. Obviously, the ideas of Voltaire, Immanuel Kant, Rousseau, and many others had a great influence at that time. You have how the egalitarianism, freedom, it has obviously reminiscence of these writers, Diderot, Humboldt, and many others. Even the Festival of the Supreme Being that was celebrated in the Revolution, it is said to have been commemorating the figure of Jacques Rousseau. It is the time when the shift of the term revolution changed from a cyclical meaning to a progressive and collective political action. And again, the French Revolution has been interpreted in different ways. For example, Lenin, the leader of the Bolsheviks, mentioned that, quote, the fairy tale of the French Revolution, end quote, as a kind of the first moment of rupture against the status quo. Karl Marx mentioned that revolutions were possible within specific political orders. His idea of the dialectical materialism, of the relation of forces that are happening around, the importance of the international framework. For that reason, Marx always believed that the revolution had to be carried in an industrialized society, because it is not important only the ideas of the people who are carrying forward their program, but also taking account the social conditions, the materialistic conditions that are in every society. And in that time, the French Revolution was a perfect example, because it was a society that there were roads around Paris that led people to send the message toward other villages in France. Obviously, the French country at that time, it was in bankrupt after having support the Americans against the English joke during the American War of Independence. So this has a lot of influence after 1783. When the conflict ended, the French state did not have enough money, and there are documents that say that in 1788, the year before the revolution, the economic situation was really bad. The inflation was rising a lot. The price of bread, which was the main sustenance of the poor people in France, was doubling the prices, and so on. So all these kind of elements converge into one wave of discontent that was perfectly channeled, first of all by the people who stormed the Bastille, second of all by the women who marched on Versailles to take the king and the queen, and third of all to establish a kind of new ideas to create the program of the revolution, such as the Declaration of the Rights of Men, the Constitutional Assembly, the formation in groups like the Jacobins, the Girondins, and the Sans-Culottes. And so Eric Hobsbawm, the historian, mentioned that the French Revolution and the British Industrial Revolution are the two most influential revolutions. Hobsbawm speaks in his book about the dual revolution, in which precisely he refers to both the French and the British Industrial Revolution. He says that the French Revolution, it had a great influence in the social political sphere of the population, changing the mental paradigm of the epoch, and the British Industrial Revolution provide the means in order to carry this process. Again, the example of the roads, the invention of vehicles which were faster in order to carry the news, the possibility to travel around in order to express their ideas. And he precisely analyzed the kind of progress made in countries so diverse like Egypt or Greece and so on, because the importance of people traveling from France by ship and going to North Africa and to Southern Europe and sharing their ideas, what has been happening in France and in those areas, like, also Ireland, but Egypt, India, Greece, and so on, how this idea could be expanded across the territory, thanks for the ideas that had been created in the French Revolution, but also through the material means established during the Industrial Revolution. And Hobsbawm, which has 4 books, in which he covers the period from 1789, start of the French Revolution, until 1991, the collapse of the Soviet Union. In these 202 years, divided in 4 books, he explains the revolutions in the world, the kind of movement that are happening, and so on. And the 4 books are interesting because they cover like the economic situation, social upheavals, the political spheres, and so on, the ideas that were being generated, the role of art and science, how, for example, he points the magic flute of Mozart, how had also a great symbolic importance after the French Revolution, and so on. So, in that sense, the French Revolution, as mentioned by Lenin, as the fairy tale, or Marx and many political theories of the epoch, even Hegel, who referred to the French Revolution as a time of elation, of kind of great things that were happening, it was a script for the future revolution. And for that reason, as a kind of guideline for the new movement that were happening around, for example, in 1830 in Europe, 1848, there was a year of revolutions, that social movement that happened in Prague, in Berlin, in Milan, in Paris. Again, in Paris, there was two revolutions in February and June, and many other regions of Europe. It was like the guideline to be followed. In that sense, the modernization is the key for the revolution. It's the framework to gain more rights, demand more participation, egalitarian society, and so on. In that sense, there is an author who considered that the 1688, the Glorious Revolution, it was the first modern revolution, the revolution that happened in England in order to put a new king, which it was done under the condition to kind of let some powers spread among parliament and so on. In that sense, a revolution are caused not by revolutionary trying to overthrow an old-oriented outdated regime, but when multiple competing visions of state modernization collide. This is his idea. But there are a lot of causes, like the class struggle, political events, relation between human and nature, the ecological perspective, and so on. Such as nowadays with the climate crisis, there is environmental activists who realize that the world is changing and how the diminish of the planet is having a toll, not just in nature, not just in non-human animals, but also in our species. In that sense, we have also some debates, like Hannah Arendt, the political theories that I have spoke with her quite widely in other episodes. She points that the American Revolution was successful, but not the French Revolution, because the American Revolution created the current American system, the Republicans, and so on. And it was fundamental because at the end, it got independence from England, and years later, centuries later, became the mighty power in the earth. However, the French, for her, it was not that so, because it was crushed later. Although I disagree with that idea, because the ideas of the French Revolution permeate later on, and even though there was a restoration in Europe, as I mentioned earlier, later these ideas had a great importance in order to form the imaginary in Europe, but also in Latin America. The concept of Latin America, it was used after 1840s in order to distance themselves for the Spanish Empire and join themselves to the French ideals of fraternité, liberté, égalité. This was happened after all the South American Spanish territory had got their independence and so on. And the thing is, like, Hannah Arendt point that the American Revolution created a space of public freedom in which free people took common concerns into their own hands, although this has been described by Alexis de Tocqueville, who point how in 1840s America, yes, there was equality among people had freedom to speak, but at the end, the coercion, the censorship, it was indirect. It was implicit into the system. Say, like, if you had a different view of the common one, you will be isolated, you will not be punished openly, but still you will be left alone in the public sphere, and henceforth people were afraid of that reason, and at the end they had to kind of put themselves into the, let's say, the general will in Wilsonian terms. Erich Hobsbawm precisely disagreed with Hannah Arendt about this idea of the revolution. And leaving a bit Europe and South America, there were other revolutions out which not follow the classical bourgeois movement and working class paradigm. The one that was a kind of theorized by Marx, when he said that in order to carry on a revolution which will give the working class the power, first it is needed a bourgeois revolution. These people will need to destroy the aristocracy, the ancient regime, then they will have to create a means of production, they will need to put all the working class together in the same place, like in the urban areas and so on. The working class will be able then to ally with themselves, because they will see each other. Before, they were peasants in the countryside, separate from in different families, they could not engage directly in everyday basis as now. So now all in the city, with the means of production under their hands, they will just need to rebel, took the means of production, and at that time overthrow the bourgeoisie, and once they are in the state, they should destroy the state and create the communist society. In that sense, he failed in his prediction because arguably the two most successful revolutions in the 20th century were the Russian Revolution and the Chinese Revolution. China Revolution happened in 1949. This revolution started in the countryside, led by Mao Zedong, with a long march, and how the peasants were fundamental in order to overthrow the regime of Chiang Kai-shek, the Kuomintang, and they were forced to leave to Taiwan, where their heirs are still living there, and for that reason the conflict between China and Taiwan still going on, because from 1949 the dictator that came before Mao Zedong, they had to flee to the island, and there had not been relations since then. In that sense, the importance of migration during revolution is fundamental. After the American Revolution, 60,000 left the country, and during the French Revolution, between 130,000 and 150,000 left the country. So it was a kind of important diaspora that happened at that time. So the revolution also, just to finish and go into a contemporary time, there is a revolution in communication, concern for global warming, there is global trends, multiculturalism, the wave of feminism, the integration of different groups, and so on, and how this relation between the kind of materialistic means, the idea of the social consciousness had been permeated in our society through the internet, in which we can establish connection with different people around the world. How the global warming is nowadays our main threat, and people is aware of that, and you see that there are demonstrations every time in the year in different countries. How with the celebration of the COP27 that last year in Egypt, there is social movement, not just in Egypt but also in different continents and so on. But at the same time, the concern of the pollution of the environment has always been there. For example, the rise of carbon emission led to the fog in London, and many people were concerned that this had a kind of problems for their own health. You have this idea, the paradox in which historians have analyzed this widely, the idea that even though societies are being more open in the last decades in order to open to the world in commerce and so on, still there are some governments that they are portraying a kind of policy of nationalism and so on. This is common from the far right movement in the last decades, how even though now the world is more connected than ever, still the seed of nationalism and to denigrate the immigrant is still growing in our current societies, unfortunately. We have David Cameron, for example, in England, how his government tried to rewrite the national history to eliminate the foreign intervention in Britain, how Michael Gove, a conservative member of the Tory party, he wanted to blame to force the historians to teach that in the First World War the blame was on Germany for the beginning of the conflict, rather than to kind of sharing the kind of guilty between England, France and Germany, for example. Also, we have the boast about uniqueness of Great Britain and so on. Something that the historian Richard Evans has widely discussed in the public sphere, how he uses history in order to dismiss the arguments of the politicians and so on. Also, we have the rise of the conspiracy theories that in internet, that this could be considered as a revolution, which is scary, but it's having a huge impact among the world. And I mean, the idea of the impact is important for the revolution because there is I don't know the author, but I don't remember now, but pointed how during the French Revolution there's a famous story of a peasant living near Paris, not that far, and he never knew in that time about the French Revolution, about the Jacobins, or about Napoleon Empire and so on in 30 years, because he was like quite retreat in his private life in the countryside and so on. So the idea is that at that time, even though these ideas had a great impact, not just for the time but for the future, there were many people in those years that they did not realize what was happening. But nowadays, with the internet and the global connection, it is difficult to think of a significant number of people who do not know about climate change, about the war in Ukraine, about the rise of inequality and different things. And at the same time, the internet is a tool which is helping everybody to be more connected to the world. So, in that sense, it is fundamental to comprehend all these ideas, the thing like approaches to study the revolution, the combination between culture and social history that Rich speak in the 1990s, creating different narratives rather than the meta-narrative one, creating the history of Black people, of women, and so on. And at the same time, how history became popular to the wider audience. It was after 1990s with the release of documentaries, historical movies in mass. Also, that it has been argued that after the fall of the Berlin Wall, there were many people looking for an identity with the collapse of the Soviet Union and so on, the financiation of TV documentaries. There was a BBC producer who mentioned that in 1990s, history is the new gardening, because it was something that even though people did not study like in a kind of academic way, but most of people, and if you think you talk to your friends or your family, your loved ones, probably everybody will say to you that they like history because it's exciting, and thanks to the kind of popular culture like the historical fiction, the historical movies, the documentaries, they have made that history is more inclusive to everybody. Or also the examples of public history, when you go to another country and you do the tour of the city and you have the guide that is explaining you the kind of facts of the city, how the city developed itself, the social movements and so on. In that sense, just to finish two sentences, It's been said that the lack of understanding between countries was one of the reasons of the two great world wars, because the means of connection was not that much. Also, although this will be arguable, because now still there are wars and there are means of connections about what is happening around. And the nation state, which was created after the French Revolution, this paradigm started to change after the expansion of history among the countries when they start to know each other better. So nation state as a kind of more exclusive territory, and this was clearly seen during the interwar period, when the empires collapsed and all the communities who had lived among themselves in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Hungarian Empire, Ottoman Empire, Prussia, and so on, suddenly they start to face each other, because there were nations that were living in a state that accordingly they not correspond to their origin and so on, and there were policies against refugees and so on. But the thing is, I disagree also with this vision, because nowadays the nation state, even though people argue that it's not important as before, there are politicians implementing measures against immigrants, refugees, and so on. So let's be aware that what is happening now. And just to finish, let's say that there has been revolution in all history. Perhaps we are living in one now, the kind of digital revolution, but also the environmental revolution, because something must to be done in order to avoid the catastrophe. And in that sense, I think people is aware of what is happening, and let's say veganism could be considered a revolution because it's changing the diet of millions of people around the world, is helping to reduce our carbon footprint. And as in a recent study in Oxford, the researchers mentioned that the best way to contribute to the Earth, to try to save the planet for its destruction, the best way to do that is becoming vegan. And this is said by the University of Oxford.